Mind if I join you? His voice barely held. 74 years old, shirt buttoned wrong, hands shaking, standing in a diner where 7 tables had already told him no. Nobody saw the bruises under his sleeves. Nobody saw the padlock marks on his wrists. Nobody knew he had escaped a locked shed with a butter knife 30 minutes ago, or that his own grandson would check that shed in less than an hour and find it empty. The last table in the room belonged to a Hells Angels biker who hadn't spoken to anyone all afternoon. Eugene Whitfield sat down across from him, and the entire diner went dead silent. What happened next exposed a secret that 7 people had been dying to keep buried. If this story moves you, subscribe and follow to the very end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. Eugene Whitfield pushed the glass door open with both hands because one hand was not enough anymore. The bell above the door jingled, and the sound hit him like an alarm. He stopped, held his breath, listened, waited for a voice behind him to shout his name, waited for a hand to grab his collar and drag him back. Nothing. Just the hum of a ceiling fan and the low clatter of forks against plates. He let the door close behind him and took his first step inside Rosie's grill. His right knee buckled, not all the way, just enough to remind him that it owned him now. The arthritis had been eating through that joint for 3 years, and Kyle had made sure he never saw a doctor for it. Kyle had made sure of a lot of things. Eugene gripped the edge of the hostess stand and steadied himself. His fingers were shaking, not from the pain, from something worse. From the knowledge that he had exactly 90 minutes before Kyle came home from work, checked the shed, and found it empty. 90 minutes. That was what freedom looked like now. A clock running backward. He scanned the room, booths along the windows, tables scattered across a tile floor that had seen better decades, a counter with red stools where a man in a trucker cap was working through a plate of meatloaf, a mother in the corner with 2 kids, one of them drawing on a placemat, a waitress with a blonde ponytail refilling coffee. Normal, all of it. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. And Eugene Whitfield standing among them like a ghost who had wandered out of his own grave. He had not been inside a restaurant in 2 years, had not sat across from another human being and shared a meal since Martha died. Martha, who had made pot roast every Sunday. Martha, who had called him Gene in a voice that made the name sound like something worth keeping. Martha, who had died in her sleep one Tuesday in April, and within 3 weeks their grandson Kyle had moved in. To help. That was the word Kyle used. Help. Eugene approached the first table. 2 men, mid-50s, baseball caps, plates half cleared, coffee still steaming. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough not to crowd. He had rehearsed this in the shed, practiced the words in a whisper while Kyle's truck idled in the driveway. Mind if I join you? His voice came out thin, cracked at the edges, like a door hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. The first man glanced at his buddy. A look passed between them, the kind of look people share when they've already decided. Sorry, pal, we're just finishing up. They were not finishing up. Their coffee was full. Their plates still had food on them. Eugene could see the lie as clearly as he could see their faces. But he nodded. Of course, sorry to bother you. He moved to the next table. His niece screamed. He gripped the back of a chair to keep himself upright. A woman, 40-something, reading a paperback with a cracked spine. She looked kind. Eugene thought she looked like someone who might say yes. Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. Would it be all right if I sat here for a few minutes? I won't be any trouble. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that had the word no already built into it. I'm actually waiting for someone, sorry. She was not waiting for anyone. Her purse was on the chair across from her. A person waiting for someone does not put their purse on the other chair. No problem at all, Eugene said. 3rd table. A young couple sharing a plate of fries. The man looked up and shook his head before Eugene even got the words out. We're good, man. 4th table. An older woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at Eugene's limp, his belt cinched so tight the leather buckled, his shirt hanging wrong. Her eyes filled with something that might have been pity, but pity does not pull out a chair. "I'm sorry, honey. I've got my things spread out here." She had a napkin and a glass of water. Fifth table. A man eating alone. Eugene felt a surge of hope. A man eating alone might understand what it means to want company. "Excuse me, sir. Mind if I—" "Taken." One word. The man did not even look up from his phone. Sixth table. Eugene's knee was grinding now. Each step sent a bolt of white fire from his kneecap to his hip. He was leaning on chairbacks like crutches, pulling himself across the diner one table at a time. A couple in their 60s. The woman looked at her husband. The husband looked at Eugene. "We're about to leave," he said. They had just gotten their food. Seventh table. A man sitting by himself near the window. One chair, one person. Eugene stopped in front of him. The man held up his hand. "Sorry, buddy. Full up." Full up. One man at a table for two. Full up. Eugene stood in the middle of Rosie's grill. The room stretched around him in every direction, and every direction was closed. 7 tables, 7 refusals, not one of them cruel. That was the worst part. Nobody had been mean to him. Nobody had raised a voice or told him to get out. They had simply decided, quietly, efficiently, without malice, that he was not their concern. And standing there, 74 years old with a bad knee and a stolen life, and 83 minutes left on a clock that only he could hear, Eugene Whitfield felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart. Something older than that. Something that had been holding since Martha died. Since the first time Kyle grabbed his arm. Since the first night in the shed. Hope. What cracked was hope. He almost turned around, almost walked out, almost limped that mile and a half back to the property and worked the latch with his butter knife and crawled back onto the cot and let the lock click behind him. Almost let this be the story of a man who tried and failed and disappeared the way old men disappear in this country, quietly, without fuss, without anyone noticing until the mail stacks up and the smell starts. But then his eyes found the back corner. The table sat against the wall where the overhead light had burned out months ago. Nobody had replaced it. The shadow lay across the table like a blanket thrown over something the diner didn't want people to see. A man sat there alone. Broad shoulders that stretched a plain black t-shirt to its limits. Mid-40s, sunburned skin, dark blonde hair pulled back and tied off. A jaw that looked like it had been broken at least once and set by someone who didn't care much about symmetry. Arms that had done things arms aren't supposed to do and carried the scars to prove it. And over the t-shirt, a leather vest. Worn, faded, road-beaten. The back patch was visible even in the bad light. Hell's Angels. The rocker underneath read Arizona. Eugene stared at that patch. His feet stopped moving. Every reflex, every survival instinct he had built over 74 years of keeping his head down and staying out of trouble. All of it fired at once. All of it said the same thing. Walk away. A man wearing that patch is not someone you approach. Not in a diner. Not anywhere. You do not sit at his table. You do not ask him for anything. You keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut, and you thank God he didn't notice you. Eugene knew this. Knew it the way he knew gravity. The way he knew that steel bends before it breaks. That load-bearing tolerances are not suggestions. That bridges fall when people ignore the math. But Eugene was out of tables, and he was out of time. He looked back at the door, 79 minutes now, maybe less. And outside that door was a mile and a half of desert road leading back to a shed with a padlock and a cot and a bucket in the corner and 4 cans of soup on a shelf that was getting emptier every week. He looked at the biker. The biker had not moved, was holding a black coffee, no sugar, staring at the far wall. Not looking at anything, not looking at Eugene, not looking at the room full of people who kept glancing toward his table and then glancing away. Eugene took a step. His knee buckled. He caught himself on the back of an empty chair. Another step. The limp turned each footfall into a collision. Heel striking tile, the sound carrying through the quiet diner like a slow drumbeat. He crossed the floor, past the tables that had said no, past the people who had decided he was not their problem, past the counter where the waitress watched him with her coffee pot frozen in mid-pour. He stopped at the edge of the shadow. The biker's name was Brody Hale, but Eugene did not know that yet. All Eugene knew was the patch on the vest and the size of the man wearing it, and the fact that this was either the bravest thing he had ever done or the last thing he would ever do. He cleared his throat. The sound came out like gravel in a tin can. "Mind if I join you?" Brody Hale did not look up, not immediately. He held his mug, let the silence sit. 3 seconds. 5. 7. Long enough for Eugene to feel every set of eyes in the diner pressing against his back. Then Brody looked at him. Not through him, not past him, not at the limp or the bad shirt or the belt that had run out of holes. He looked at Eugene Whitfield the way a man looks at something when he wants to understand it before he responds to it. His eyes moved to Eugene's wrists, both of them. Yellow bruising, circular, worse on the right, grip marks, not a fall, not an accident, restraint. His eyes moved to Eugene's face, the hollowed cheeks, the skin pulled too tight across the bones. Not sick, starved, slowly, deliberately, the way you starve someone when you want them weak but alive. His eyes moved to Eugene's eyes, and that was where Brody stopped. Because what he saw there, he had seen before. In shelters, in back rooms, in the faces of people who had been caged so long they'd forgotten what open ground looked like. Fear. Not the sharp kind, not the kind that comes and goes. The deep kind. The kind that lives in your muscles. The kind that makes your shoulders climb toward your ears and your hands curl into fists even when there is nothing to fight. The kind that rewires you until you cannot take a bite of food without listening for footsteps. Brody Hale had buried friends. He had sat in federal interrogation rooms and given nothing but his name. He had ridden through dust storms that stripped paint off gas tanks. He had done things that would make the people in this diner lock their car doors and drive away. But he had also held a brother's kid at a funeral because nobody else would step up. He had pulled over on a highway outside Gila Bend in 114-degree heat because a woman was trying to change a tire with a baby screaming in the back seat. He had sat in hospital rooms with dying men and stayed until the machines went flat because he believed that no one should cross alone. The world saw the patch. Brody saw what was underneath. And right now, underneath the trembling and the limp and the shirt buttoned wrong, underneath 74 years and a bad knee and a voice that barely worked, he saw a man who had walked into this diner as a last resort. A man who had been turned away by every table and kept walking. A man who had come to the one place nobody in their right mind would come, the dark corner, the Hell's Angels table, because he had nowhere else left. Brody set his coffee down. He stood up. Not fast, not aggressive, slow, deliberate. The way a man stands when he wants the room to see exactly what he is doing and why. He reached across the table, gripped the empty chair, pulled it back, angled it slightly, just enough so that a man with a bad right knee would not have to twist to sit down. Sit. One word. No warmth in it, no hostility, no performance. Just a fact, like gravity, like a bridge that holds because someone did the math. The diner went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that happens when every person in a room realizes they are watching something they will not forget. The trucker at the counter put his fork down. The mother in the corner looked up from her phone. The waitress set the coffee pot on the counter and did not pick it up again. 7 tables had said no. 7 tables had looked at an old man with a limp and decided he was not worth the trouble. And the Hells Angels biker in the back corner had pulled out a chair. Eugene sat, slowly, carefully, lowering himself into the seat the way you lower yourself into water when you are not sure the ground underneath is solid. His right knee cracked. His hands gripped the table edge. His shoulders, the shoulders that had been locked up around his ears since he walked through the door, dropped. Half an inch, maybe less, but enough. Enough to breathe. Brody sat back down. He raised one finger toward the waitress without looking away from Eugene. She came over fast, faster than she had come to any table in the last hour. Eggs, Brody said, scrambled, bacon, toast, more coffee, orange juice. The waitress looked at Eugene. Eugene shook his head. I can't pay for that. I don't have any money. Brody cut him off, not with words, with a look. The kind of look that said, the food is coming. You are going to eat it. We are not going to discuss this. Eugene closed his mouth. The food arrived in 6 minutes. The plate sat in front of him steaming. Eggs piled high, 4 strips of bacon, 2 slices of toast, already buttered, a glass of orange juice sweating in the heat, a fresh cup of coffee, black. Eugene stared at the plate. He did not pick up the fork. Brody watched him, didn't push, didn't ask what was wrong. He already knew what was wrong. A man who has been rationed, who has eaten half a can of beans and called it dinner, who has counted crackers and divided them across days, does not simply pick up a fork when food appears. He checks first, checks the room, checks the door, checks to make sure no one is going to take the plate away. Eugene checked the door, then the window, then the door again. Then he picked up the fork. He ate slowly, small bites, chewing carefully, swallowing like each mouthful was a decision. He ate the eggs first, then the toast, then the bacon, 1 strip at a time. He drank the orange juice in small sips, holding the glass with both hands. Brody sipped his coffee and said nothing. He let the man eat. Let him have this. A meal, a chair, a table where nobody was watching him with suspicion or pity or impatience. 7 minutes passed. Eugene finished the plate. He set the fork down and pressed his palms flat on the table. His eyes were wet. Not crying, not yet, just wet. The way a dam looks right before it gives. I shouldn't be here, Eugene said. Brody set his mug down. But you are. He'll know. When he gets home and checks the shed, he'll know I got out. Who? My grandson. Brody's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Your grandson locks you in a shed? Eugene's hands trembled against the table. It's not, he calls it the guest house. That's what he tells people. Converted garden shed, but there's a padlock on the outside, a cot, a bucket. His voice dropped. The window's boarded from the outside. I haven't seen out of that window in 6 months. How long? 2 years, since Martha died. He moved in, said he wanted to help, and the bruises on your wrists. Eugene looked down at them, the yellow circles, the fingerprint pattern. He did not try to explain them away. He did not say he fell. He did not say it was nothing. He grabs me when I argue, when I say the money is mine, when I say I want to see a doctor. He grabs me and he says, Eugene stopped, swallowed. Who's going to believe you, old man? You don't even know what day it is. Do you know what day it is? It's Friday, June 14th. The temperature outside is 104 degrees. I worked 33 years as a bridge engineer for the state of Arizona. I can still calculate load-bearing tolerances in my head. I finished the crossword in the Tucson Star this morning in 9 minutes. I know exactly where I am, what day it is, and what I had for dinner 3 nights ago, which was half a can of beans because that's what was left. He looked at Brody with eyes that burned. I am not confused. He tells people I'm confused. There is a difference. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. full of everything Eugene had not been allowed to say for 2 years, full of every time he had tried to tell someone and been dismissed, redirected, patted on the hand. Brody leaned forward, his forearms on the table, his voice low enough that nobody beyond this table could hear it. "What did he take from you?" "The dam broke. Everything." Eugene told him everything. The money first. Kyle started with the bills, said Eugene was forgetting to pay them. Eugene had been paying his own bills since 1971, had never missed a payment on anything in 53 years. But Kyle called the bank, got himself added to the accounts, started moving money. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, 15,000 in one transaction 4 months ago. Then the car. Kyle took the keys, said Eugene was a danger on the road. Eugene had a clean driving record for 56 years. Then the phone. Kyle canceled the line, said Eugene didn't need it, said he could use Kyle's if he needed to call anyone. But Kyle's phone was always in Kyle's pocket. Then the ID, driver's license, social security card, all of it gone from the drawer where Eugene had kept them for decades. Kyle said he put them somewhere safe. Eugene never saw them again. Then the people, the neighbors stopped coming, the pastor stopped visiting, the friends from the VFW stopped calling, because Kyle told them all the same story. Grandpa's having episodes. He's declining. It's hard to watch. We're doing our best. And then a doctor, a woman named Alcott. She came to the house. Kyle was in the room the whole time. She asked Eugene questions, simple questions. What year is it? Who is the president? Count backward from 100 by sevens. Eugene answered every one correctly. She diagnosed him with moderate to severe cognitive decline. She wrote it down right there in the kitchen, Eugene said, right in front of me. And I said, "That's not true." I answered everything right. And she looked at Kyle, not at me. She looked at Kyle and she said, "This is very common. They don't recognize the decline." And Kyle nodded. And that was it. That piece of paper made me invisible. Brody's jaw tightened. A muscle near his temple twitched. He was quiet for 10 seconds. Then, "You said he changed the insurance." "Life insurance. $480,000. The beneficiary was the VFW post in Tucson. Martha and I set that up years ago. Kyle changed it to his name. I found the paperwork in the kitchen trash, under coffee grounds, like he wanted to hide it but didn't think I'd look." "But you looked." "I always look." That's what he never understood. He thinks I'm broken. He tells everyone I'm broken. But I am not broken. Eugene leaned in. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I have a storage unit, rented it 8 months ago, paid cash from money I hid inside a boot in the back of the shed. Kyle doesn't know it exists. Inside that unit is everything. Bank statements, the insurance paperwork, the medical records, and a notebook." "What kind of notebook?" "Spiral bound, blue cover, every page filled, dates, amounts, what he said, what he did, when the lock went on the door, when the food stopped, when he grabbed me, when the doctor came, everything." He paused. "The first page says, 'If anything happens to me, this is why.'" Eugene reached into his pocket. His fingers were shaking so badly it took him 3 tries. He pulled out a small brass key and slid it across the table. "Unit 19, Desert Ridge Storage, off the frontage road past the truck stop." Brody looked at the key. He did not touch it. "If something happens to me," Eugene said, "somebody needs to know that unit exists. Somebody who won't ignore it. Somebody who won't be afraid of him." "Why me?" Eugene looked at the Hells Angels patch, then back at Brody's face. "Because 7 people in this room said no, and you pulled out a chair." He paused. "A man who does that isn't the man most people think he is." Brody picked up the key. He held it in his palm, closed his fingers around it. He could feel the weight of it, not the brass, but what it carried. A man's entire life. Everything that had been stolen. Everything that had been silenced. Everything that had been locked behind a door. He put the key in his vest pocket. "You have to go back," Brody said. Eugene's face crumpled. Just for a second, then he pulled it together. "I know. Not because you belong there, because if you don't, he'll know something changed. Right now, the only advantage you have is that he thinks you're broken. Let him keep thinking that." "How long?" "Not long. I need a few days." "A few days," Eugene repeated it like a sentence being handed down. "A few days in the shed. Can you hold?" Eugene looked at his hands, the bruised wrists, the shaking fingers. He pressed his palms flat on the table until the trembling stopped. "I've held for 2 years. I can hold a few more days." He stood. The knee cracked. He gripped the table edge and pulled himself upright. He stood there for a moment, looking at Brody Hale, a man he had known for 45 minutes. A stranger with a leather vest and a criminal record and a coffee mug and a chair that he had pulled out for no reason other than that someone needed to sit down. "You did the right thing walking in here today," Brody said. Eugene's eyes filled. "I almost didn't." "But you did." "But I did." Eugene turned. He limped across the diner floor, past the 7 tables, past the people who had said no, past the waitress who held the door open for him. The bell jingled as he stepped out into the heat, and every single person in that diner watched him go. Brody sat alone at the back table. He held his coffee, the key pressed against his chest through the vest pocket. He stared at the empty chair across from him, the one he had pulled out for a stranger, and he thought about what Eugene had said. "If anything happens to me, this is why." Brody picked up his phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice. "Tank, I need you and Crank at the shop tonight, 9 o'clock. A pause on the other end, then Tank's voice, low and rumbling. "What's going on?" Brody looked at the empty chair one more time. "Someone asked me for help, and I said yes." Tank showed up at 8:45. He always showed up early. That was the thing about Dex Morrison. 310 pounds, hands like engine blocks, a jaw that looked like it had been poured from concrete, and the man had never been late for anything in his life. He had done 18 months in Florence for breaking a man's orbital bone in a bar parking lot. The man had been dragging a woman by her hair. Tank had asked him once to stop. The man swung. Tank didn't ask again. He served his time, came out, and never once said he'd do it differently. He walked into Brody's shop, pulled a stool from under the workbench, and sat without a word. He could read Brody's posture the way most people read headlines. Something was wrong, something heavy, so Tank sat and waited. Crank arrived at 9 on the dot. Virgil Rochford, 58 years old, lean, quiet the way a blade is quiet. He had been in the club longer than anyone in the chapter. He spoke maybe 30 words on a good day, and 20 of them were the ones that mattered. He leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms and looked at Brody. "Close the door," Brody said. Crank closed it. Brody pulled the brass key from his vest pocket and set it on the workbench. He told them everything, every word Eugene had said. The grandson, the shed, the padlock, the money, the insurance, the doctor, the bruises, the notebook, the storage unit. He told them how Eugene had walked across the diner floor on a knee that could barely hold him, how 7 tables turned him away, how the old man had stood in the middle of the room with nowhere left to go and walked to the one table everyone else avoided. When Brody finished, Tank was gripping the edge of the stool so hard the metal was bending under his fingers. "How old did you say he was?" Tank asked. 74. "And the grandson locks him in a shed. Padlock on the outside, cot inside, bucket in the corner, window boarded shut." Tank stood up. The stool scraped against the concrete floor. "Give me the address." "No." "Give me the address, Brody." "Sit down." "I'm not going to sit down. You just told me a 35-year-old man is keeping his own grandfather in a cage and starving him. Give me the address and I'll handle it tonight." Brody's voice didn't rise. It lowered. That was worse. Everyone who knew Brody knew that. The louder men get, the less dangerous they are. Brody got quieter. You go to that house tonight and break that kid's jaw, which is what you want to do, which is what I want to do, and Eugene Whitfield goes into the system. Ward of the state, some facility in Phoenix where he doesn't know anyone and nobody knows him. And Kyle walks, gets a lawyer, plays the victim, tells the judge a biker gang attacked him in his home. The story writes itself. We lose. Eugene loses. Kyle wins. Tank's chest was heaving. His fists were clenched at his sides. So what do? We do it right. They drove to Desert Ridge Storage in Crank's pickup. No bikes, no patches, no vests. 3 men in a truck that looked like every other truck on the road at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Crank drove. Tank rode shotgun. Brody sat in the back with the brass key turning between his fingers. The storage facility was the kind of place where people put things they didn't want to deal with. Chain link fence, orange roll-up doors, a security light that buzzed and flickered every 30 seconds. Unit 19. Brody slid the key in. The lock turned smooth. Eugene had kept it oiled. A man locked in a shed who still had the discipline to oil a lock he could only use in secret. That told Brody something. That told him everything. The door rolled up. Inside, a single file box sat on the concrete floor. Nothing else. No furniture, no clutter, just the box. Like Eugene had stripped his entire life down to the one thing that mattered and placed it here, where Kyle couldn't touch it. Brody opened the box. Bank statements, stacked in chronological order. Every withdrawal highlighted in yellow. $5,000 on March 10th, $8,000 on April 2nd, $3,000 on April 19th, $10,000 on May 5th, $15,000 in a single transaction on June 1st. The numbers kept climbing, month after month, page after page, yellow highlights screaming from the paper like bruises on a ledger. Tank picked up the insurance policy, read it once, read it again. $480,000. Beneficiary change from the VFW Post 549, Tucson, Arizona, to Kyle James Whitfield, changed 9 months ago. The signature on the change form was shaky but legible. Eugene's name. But the handwriting didn't match the notebook. He forged it, Tank said. The old man didn't sign this. Brody pulled out the medical records. Dr. Miriam Alcott, MD, Internal Medicine, office in Oro Valley. The diagnosis was typed on official letterhead. Moderate to severe cognitive decline. Recommendation, full-time supervised care. Patient unable to manage financial, legal, or personal affairs independently. The date on the report was 2 days after Eugene's crossword time was 9 minutes. And then Brody found the notebook. Blue cover, spiral bound. The kind you buy at a drugstore for $2. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small, tight, controlled. The handwriting of a man who had spent 33 years writing engineering specifications where one wrong number could bring a bridge down. Every letter precise, every word deliberate. If anything happens to me, this is why. Brody read. March 12th. Kyle took the checkbook today. I asked for it back. He grabbed my arm. First time. Left a mark above the elbow. He said I was being difficult. March 26th. No visitors in 2 weeks. Mrs. Patterson brought a casserole. Kyle met her at the door. Told her I was sleeping. I was standing in the hallway behind him. She didn't see me. April 4th. Kyle went to the bank with my social security number. Rosa at the counter called me. I couldn't get to the phone. Kyle had it in his truck. April 19th. Kyle moved me to the shed today. Said the house needed work. Said it was temporary. There was a padlock on the door when I came back from the bathroom. I heard it click. That sound. I will hear that sound for the rest of my life. May 1st. Found the insurance paperwork in the kitchen trash. Under coffee grounds. Beneficiary changed. He didn't think I'd look. He never thinks I'll look. May 15th. Haven't been outside the property in 5 weeks. The back fence has a gap near the east corner. I could fit through. Not yet. Not until I have the proof. June 2nd. Alcott came to the house, asked me questions. I answered them all. She wrote cognitive decline on the form anyway. Kyle was smiling, the kind of smile people give when they've won something they didn't earn. June 8th. Half a can of beans for dinner. Kyle brought groceries yesterday. None of them went to the shed. June 10th. I started working the latch with a butter knife. The screws are old, brass. They'll give if I keep at it. I have nothing but time. June 14th. Today I leave. Brody closed the notebook. He held it in both hands. He pressed it against his chest, and he stood in that storage unit under the buzzing light, and he did not move for a long time. Tank was sitting on the floor. His head was in his hands. This was a man who had broken bones without flinching. A man who had stared down corrections officers and gang leaders and federal agents. And he was sitting on a concrete floor with his head in his hands because of a spiral-bound notebook written by a 74-year-old man with a butter knife in a bad knee. Crank spoke. First words all night. I know someone. Brody looked at him. My cousin Nina works in the county attorney's office, Pima County. She's a legal assistant, but she's got the DA's ear. If this is what it looks like, she can move it. How fast? Fast enough. They locked the unit, put everything back exactly as they'd found it, drove back to the shop in silence. The kind of silence that happens between men who have just seen something that changed the shape of the room they were standing in. The next morning, Brody woke up at 5. He couldn't sleep, hadn't been able to. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the first page of that notebook. If anything happens to me, this is why. A man who knew he might not survive writing instructions for whoever found his body. Brody drove to the Whitfield property. No vest, no patches, jeans and a plain gray shirt. He parked 2 streets over and walked. The house looked normal from the front. Clean lawn, trimmed hedges, a welcome mat at the front door. Kyle's car was gone. At work. Eugene had said Kyle left by 8 every morning. It was 8:20. Brody went around the back. The shed was 20 feet from the house. Converted garden shed. The padlock hung open. Eugene had worked the latch again with the butter knife. He was inside, but the lock was loose. Smart. If Kyle checked, the lock would look closed from a distance. Brody pushed the door open. He had seen prison cells bigger than this. A cot with a thin blanket that wouldn't keep a dog warm. A bucket in the corner with a lid that didn't fit. 4 cans of soup on a plywood shelf. A sleeve of crackers. A broken space heater with a frayed cord. The window sealed from the outside with plywood and screws. And on the wall, at eye level for a man sitting on a cot, scratched into the drywall with a nail, 5 words. I am still here. Brody stared at those words. He pressed his palm flat against the wall. He could feel the grooves where the nail had cut through paint and plaster. Each letter carved deep, deliberate, not scratched in panic, carved in defiance. He took out his phone and photographed everything. The cot, the bucket, the shelf, the sealed window, the padlock, the words on the wall. Every photograph a piece of evidence. Every photograph a page from a story that Kyle had written in silence and Eugene had rewritten in resistance. He left without a sound. Over the next 2 days, Brody made calls. Not the kind of calls that start with a phone number, the kind that start with a name and end with a conversation in a parking lot or a back booth, or a truck cab with the engine idling. Hank Reeves, retired mail carrier, walked the route past Eugene's house for 17 years. Hank said he used to see Eugene every morning, out front, coffee in hand, waving. Then one day he stopped coming out. Hank knocked twice. Kyle answered both times, said Eugene was resting. Hank told Brody that old men don't just stop waving. Not the ones who have done it every morning for 17 years. Donna Britton, bartender at the VFW post on Speedway. Eugene had been a Thursday night regular. Trivia night, 6 years running, never missed. His team was called the Bridge Builders. Donna said one Thursday Eugene didn't show. The next week, Kyle called the VFW and said Eugene wasn't up to coming anymore. Donna tried calling Eugene's number. Disconnected. Rosa Gutierrez, bank teller, First National. She remembered the day Eugene leaned across the counter, his eyes darting toward the door, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't right. He's taking it all." Rosa had called Adult Protective Services that same afternoon. A caseworker visited the house 3 days later. Kyle was in the room the entire time. The caseworker asked Eugene if he felt safe. Eugene looked at Kyle. Kyle was smiling. Eugene said everything was fine. The case was closed. Rosa told Brody the sentence that made him pull his truck to the side of the road and sit there for 10 minutes staring at the steering wheel. The system believed the younger voice. 6 words. 6 words that explained everything. Why the bank didn't freeze the account. Why the caseworker closed the file. Why the neighbors stopped asking. Why the pastor stopped coming. Why an entire community looked at a 74-year-old man who was screaming for help and heard nothing. Because Kyle was young and polite and clean-cut and articulate. And he told a story about a confused old man who didn't know what was happening to him. And everyone believed the younger voice. Brody took all of it to Nina Delgado. Crank drove him to her office after hours. She met them in the parking garage, professional, careful. She understood what this was, and she understood what it could become if it was handled wrong. She spent 20 minutes with the documents, bank statements spread on the hood of Crank's truck, medical records angled toward the fluorescent light, the notebook open, page after page. When she finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The notebook alone is devastating," she said. "Contemporaneous record, dated entries, specific details, written by a man who is clearly competent. Any jury that reads this notebook will convict." "What about the doctor?" Brody asked. "The Alcott diagnosis is the thread we pull. If we can prove the cognitive decline was fabricated, the whole house of cards falls. The financial power of attorney, the insurance change, the justification for confinement, all of it rests on that diagnosis. Take out the diagnosis and Kyle has no legal cover for anything he's done. Can you get this to the county attorney?" "I can get it reviewed by Monday. If the CA signs off, we go to a judge for an emergency welfare check. Not the kind where a caseworker shows up and Kyle controls the room. The kind where deputies go in with a search warrant. No notice, no warning. Kyle doesn't get to clean up." "How fast after Monday?" "Could be days, could be a week." "He's in a shed, Nina, with 4 cans of soup and a bucket." Nina looked at him. Her eyes were hard, but her voice was not. "I know, but if we rush this and the warrant gets challenged, Kyle's attorney will tear it apart. And then Kyle knows we're coming. And Eugene disappears, not into a shed, into a facility somewhere Kyle controls. Or worse." She didn't say what worse meant. She didn't have to. "Stay away from the house," Nina said. "Stay away from Kyle. Do not go near Eugene. If Kyle's attorney finds out a Hells Angels member was the catalyst for this investigation, the defense narrative writes itself. Biker gang harassment, vigilante justice, intimidation. You know what a jury hears when they hear your club's name?" Brody knew. He had spent 25 years knowing. "When it moves fast," Nina said. "But until then, you stay invisible." Staying invisible was the hardest thing Brody had ever done. Harder than any ride. Harder than any room he'd walked into, not knowing if he'd walk out. Because this time, there was nothing to fight. No man to face. No road to ride. Just waiting. Just trusting the system he had spent his entire adult life operating outside of. He sent word to Eugene the only way he could. Through Hank, the mail carrier. Hank still walked the route. Brody met him at a gas station off Ina Road and gave him 3 words written on a folded piece of paper. Friday. Stay ready. Hank looked at the paper, looked at Brody, didn't ask a single question, just folded the paper into his shirt pocket and nodded. The next morning, Hank walked his route. He found Eugene sitting on the step outside the shed. The padlock was hanging open. Kyle was at work. The sun was pushing 106 degrees, and Eugene was sitting in it because the shed was hotter inside than out. Hank handed him the paper. Eugene unfolded it, read the 3 words. His hands were trembling, but his eyes were steady. He closed them, took a breath, pressed the paper against his chest. "Tell him thank you," Eugene said. Hank nodded, turned, walked back to his truck. Eugene sat on that step for another hour. He held the paper in his lap. 3 words. Friday. Stay ready. Written by a stranger he had known for less than an hour. A man he had found at the last table in a roadside diner because every other table had said no. He folded the paper small enough to fit inside the sole of his shoe, where Kyle would never think to look. Then he went back inside the shed and pulled the door shut behind him and waited. 3 more days, 3 more nights on the cot, 3 more dinners of canned soup eaten cold because the hot plate Kyle had promised never came. 3 more mornings listening for the truck to start and the tires to crunch down the driveway before he could breathe. But for the first time in 2 years, Eugene Whitfield was not waiting to be found. He was waiting to be freed. And in a motorcycle shop 15 miles away, Brody Hale sat in the dark with his phone on the workbench and his eyes on the clock and the brass key in his pocket, pressing against his ribs like a second heartbeat. Friday came the way a held breath finally releases. Brody was awake before dawn. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the words carved into drywall. I am still here. He saw the bucket in the corner. He saw the cans on the shelf. He saw Eugene sitting on that cot holding a butter knife like it was the last tool left between him and vanishing. His phone rang at 6:12. Nina. It's a go. Judge Camacho signed the warrant at 5:45 this morning. Emergency welfare check with search authority. 2 deputies from the Marana substation, 1 APS caseworker, a victim's advocate from our office. They roll at 10. Brody exhaled. His hand was gripping the phone so hard his knuckles had gone white. What do I do? Nothing. You do nothing. You stay at your shop. You do not drive past that house. You do not call anyone connected to this. You sit and you wait, and you let the system do what it's supposed to do. Nina. I mean it, Brody. If you show up within a mile of that property, I can't protect this case. Kyle's lawyer will have a field day. You know that. I know. Then stay put. She hung up. Brody set the phone on the workbench. He stared at it. 10 o'clock. 3 hours and 48 minutes. He picked up a wrench and started working on a carburetor that didn't need fixing, just to give his hands something to do that wasn't punching a wall. Tank called at 7. Today? Today. You need me there? Nina says we stay away. Tank was quiet for a long time. I don't like sitting on my hands, brother. Neither do I. If something goes wrong, if that kid does something to the old man before they get there, then we deal with it after. But right now we play it straight. Tank hung up. Brody went back to the carburetor. His hands were shaking. The wrench slipped twice. At the Whitfield property, the morning started the way every morning had started for 2 years. Kyle's alarm went off at 6:30. He showered, dressed, button-down shirt, khaki pants, leather shoes, combed his hair, checked his teeth in the mirror. The face that looked back was handsome, clean, trustworthy. The face of a man who coached Little League and organized church fundraisers and held doors open for old women at the grocery store. He walked to the shed at 7:15. He did this every morning, opened the padlock, looked inside, confirmed Eugene was on the cot, confirmed the bucket was in the corner, confirmed the food supply. He never spoke. He just looked, the way a man checks on livestock. Eugene was sitting on the cot. His eyes were open. He had been awake since 4. He had not slept. The piece of paper was in his shoe. Friday, stay ready. Kyle looked at him. You need anything? He always asked. Every morning. The same question, delivered in the same tone, with the same expression of mild concern. It was part of the performance. If anyone ever asked, Kyle could say he checked on his grandfather every morning. Asked if he needed anything. Took care of him. Eugene shook his head. Kyle nodded, closed the door. The padlock clicked. That sound. The sound Eugene had written about in the notebook. The sound that would live in his bones until the day he died. Metal finding metal. Locking. Sealing. Erasing. Kyle's truck started at 7:20. The tires crunched down the gravel driveway. The engine faded. Eugene sat on the cot. His hands were in his lap. His thumbs pressed together. His knee was throbbing. The arthritis had been worse all week. The heat swelling the joint until it felt like ground glass under the kneecap. But he did not move. He sat and he waited and he counted the hours the way he had counted every hour for the last 2 years. Except this time he was counting towards something. At 9:45, 2 Pima County Sheriff's cruisers turned onto the road that led to the Whitfield property. Behind them, an unmarked sedan carrying the APS caseworker and the victim's advocate from the county attorney's office. No sirens, no lights. A welfare check doesn't announce itself. Kyle was at work. His office was 22 minutes away. Nina had confirmed his schedule. He had a 10:15 meeting with a client. He would not be home. But Kyle had a security camera on the front porch. A detail he had never mentioned to Eugene. A detail Eugene did not know about. A detail that in 2 minutes would change everything. The deputies pulled into the driveway at 9:58. Deputy Sarah Montoya, 8 years on the force, stepped out first. Her partner, Deputy James Caldwell, 19 years, walked to the front door. The caseworker and the advocate stayed by the sedan. Caldwell knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Nothing. Montoya walked the perimeter. She found the backyard. She found the shed. She saw the padlock. Caldwell, back here. Caldwell came around the house. He looked at the padlock. Looked at Montoya. That's a residential padlock on an exterior door, Montoya said. On a structure with a sealed window. Could be storage. Could be. Warrant says we open it. Caldwell radioed dispatch. Confirmed the warrant number. Confirmed authority to breach. Then he pulled bolt cutters from the cruiser and walked back to the shed. The padlock resisted for exactly 1 second. Then the jaws of the bolt cutters bit through and the lock dropped to the dirt like a dead thing. Montoya pulled the door open. Eugene was sitting on the cot. He was holding the butter knife, the same one he had used on the latch for weeks. He was gripping it in his right hand, not as a weapon, but as a tool. The only tool he had, the thing that had opened the door when nothing else would. He looked up at the deputies. His eyes were wet. His hands were shaking, but his voice was clear. Is it Friday? Montoya felt something seize in her chest. She had been on the force 8 years. She had seen domestic violence. She had seen neglect. She had pulled children out of houses that no child should have been in. But something about those 3 words, is it Friday? Spoken by a 74-year-old man sitting on a cot in a locked shed, holding a butter knife. Something about the way he asked it, not with fear but with hope, broke something open inside her that she would carry for the rest of her career. Yes, sir, she said. It's Friday. Eugene closed his eyes. His shoulders dropped. The butter knife fell from his fingers and clattered on the concrete floor. He pressed both palms flat on the cot and he breathed. In and out. In and out. The way a man breathes when he has been holding for so long, he forgot what letting go felt like. My name is Eugene Whitfield, he said. I live here. This is my property. My grandson locked me in this shed. He has been doing it for 2 years. Caldwell was already photographing. The cot, the thin blanket, the bucket with the ill-fitting lid, the 4 cans of soup, the sleeve of crackers, the broken space heater, the plywood screwed over the window from the outside, and on the wall, scratched into the drywall at eye level, "I am still here." Caldwell photographed those words 3 times, from 3 different angles. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. Meanwhile, 22 miles away, Kyle Whitfield's phone buzzed. The security camera app. Motion detected. Front porch. He opened the notification and saw 2 sheriff's cruisers in his driveway. His face did not change. That was the thing about Kyle. His face never changed. Not when he grabbed Eugene's arm the first time, not when he signed the forged insurance documents, not when he locked the shed door and heard the old man on the other side asking to be let out. His face was a mask he had worn so long it had fused to the bone. He stood up from his desk, told his office manager he had a family emergency, drove home at exactly the speed limit, not faster, not slower. A man in a hurry attracts attention. Kyle never attracted attention. He pulled into the driveway at 10:27. The deputies were already in the backyard. The caseworker was sitting with Eugene on the back steps. The advocate was on the phone. Kyle stepped out of his truck. He straightened his shirt. He walked toward them with the expression he had practiced in mirrors and perfected in living rooms and church lobbies and bank offices. The expression of a concerned, loving, slightly overwhelmed caregiver. "Officers, what's going on? Is everything okay? Is my grandfather all right?" Montoya turned to face him. She studied him the way she studied everyone she encountered on a call. Not his words, his hands. His hands were at his sides, relaxed, open. The hands of a man who had nothing to hide, or the hands of a man who knew exactly how to look like he had nothing to hide. "Mr. Whitfield?" "Kyle Whitfield, yes. That's my grandfather over there. Is he hurt? Did something happen?" "Sir, we're executing a welfare check pursuant to a judicial order. Can you tell me about the structure in the backyard?" "The shed? Of course. We converted it. Grandpa likes to sit out there. He's always been independent, doesn't like being in the main house all day. We set it up as a little retreat for him." There was a padlock on the exterior of the door. Kyle didn't blink. "For the animals. Coyotes come through the neighborhood. We've had issues. The lock keeps them from getting into his space when he's not there." "Your grandfather was inside when we opened it." "He was? He likes to nap out there. He probably closed the door himself." "The lock was on the outside, sir." Kyle paused. 1 second, recalculating. Sometimes I lock it out of habit when I leave for work. I check on him every morning. I must have locked it without realizing he was inside." "Oh God, is he okay?" "I'm so sorry, that's completely my fault." Smooth, fluid, every answer ready before the question finished. A man who had rehearsed every possible scenario the way Eugene had rehearsed load-bearing calculations. Except Kyle's math was built on lies, and lies have tolerances too. Caldwell came around the corner. "Deputy Montoya, you need to see the interior." Montoya followed him to the shed. She looked inside. She saw the cot, the bucket, the sealed window, the scratched words on the wall. She came back to Kyle. "Sir, can you explain why the window of that structure is sealed from the outside with plywood?" Kyle's mask flickered. Half a second. A micro-expression that most people would miss. Montoya did not miss it. The glass was broken. We boarded it up, haven't had a chance to replace it." "The plywood is screwed in from the exterior." "Right, so it would hold properly." "There's a cot inside, a bucket, 4 cans of food, no running water, no working heat. He has access to the house. He comes and goes. He just prefers—" "Mr. Whitfield, your grandfather has bruising on both wrists consistent with physical restraint." Kyle's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time, the script had run out. He stood in his own driveway in his pressed shirt and his leather shoes, and he had nothing left to perform. "I want to call my lawyer," he said. "You're not under arrest, sir, but we are transporting your grandfather to Tucson Medical Center for evaluation. He doesn't need a hospital. He's fine. He's confused sometimes, but he's fine. That's what the evaluation will determine. The paramedics arrived at 10:41. Eugene was sitting on the back steps when they came around the house with the stretcher. He looked at the stretcher and shook his head. "I can walk." His voice was firm, tired, but firm. The caseworker helped him stand. His knee buckled, and she caught his arm. Gently, not the way Kyle caught it, and steadied him. As Eugene passed Kyle in the driveway, something happened that neither deputy expected. Eugene stopped. He turned his head. He looked at his grandson, not with anger, not with hatred, not with the broken, submissive eyes Kyle had spent 2 years manufacturing. Eugene looked at Kyle with clarity, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who someone is because you have watched them become it, day by day, in a locked room with nothing to do but observe. Kyle looked back, and for the first time, he saw it. The old man's eyes were sharp, focused, present. The eyes of a man who had never been confused a single day in the last 2 years. The eyes of a man who had kept a notebook, who had rented a storage unit, who had carved words into a wall. Kyle's mask cracked. Not on the surface, deeper, behind the eyes, in the place where he stored the truth about himself that he never let anyone see. Eugene didn't say a word. He turned away and let the caseworker guide him to the ambulance. As the paramedics were loading him in, Eugene asked one of them a question. The paramedic, a young woman named Casey, leaned in to hear him. "Can you get a message to someone for me?" "Who, sir?" "I don't know his full name. He's at a diner called Rosie's Grill. Off the highway. He sits in the back corner." Casey looked confused. "What's the message?" Eugene settled onto the stretcher. He looked at the ceiling of the ambulance. He closed his eyes. "Tell him I'm still here." 15 miles away, Brody Hale was pacing his shop. He had taken the carburetor apart, put it back together, and taken it apart again. He had gone through a pot of coffee. He had checked his phone 43 times. At 11:16 it rang. Nina's name on the screen. He answered before the first ring finished. "Tell me." Nina's voice was different. He had known her for 6 years through Crank. She was steady, professional, controlled, the kind of woman who could deliver a devastating cross-examination without raising her pulse. But right now her voice had a crack in it, a fracture running through the words. "They got him out." Brody sat down on the shop floor. His legs just gave out. He sat on the concrete with his back against the workbench and his phone pressed to his ear, and he pressed his free hand against his eyes. "How is he?" "Dehydrated, malnourished. The knee is bad, untreated arthritis, probably needs surgery. Bruising on both wrists. They're running a full evaluation at TMC." "And the cognitive test?" Nina paused. When she spoke again, the crack widened. "Clean. Not borderline, not ambiguous, clean. The neurologist said he scored in the 94th percentile for his age group. 94th. A man Kyle convinced the entire world was losing his mind just tested higher than most people 20 years younger." Brody pressed his hand harder against his eyes. His chest was heaving, but he was not crying. He was doing something past crying, something that doesn't have a name. "Nina, what did they find?" Everything he described. The cot, the bucket, the sealed window, the cans, and the words on the wall, Brody. The deputies photographed them. "I am still here," scratched into the drywall with a nail. She stopped. "There's something else." When the paramedics were loading him, he asked them to deliver a message. He said he didn't know the man's full name. He said the man sits in the back corner of a diner called Rosie's Grill off the highway. Brody couldn't speak. He said to tell you, "I'm still here." The phone was silent for a long time. 2 people breathing, not talking, just existing in the shared space of a phone call that carried more weight than either of them could hold alone. Charges? Brody finally asked. Monday, the county attorney is reviewing everything this weekend. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, unlawful confinement, fraud. We're pushing for maximum on every count. And the doctor? Alcott? She's next. The fabricated diagnosis is the keystone. We pull that out and everything Kyle built collapses. Monday morning, the charges came down. Elder abuse, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, unlawful confinement, fraud. 4 counts, each carrying significant prison time. Kyle was arrested at his office at 9:15 in the morning. 2 detectives walked through the front door of the real estate firm where he worked and asked for Kyle Whitfield by name. His co-workers watched from their desks. His office manager, the one he'd told about the family emergency 3 days earlier, stood by the water cooler with her hand over her mouth. Kyle did not resist. He put his hands behind his back without being asked. He kept the same calm, polite expression he had worn to every church fundraiser and bank meeting and neighbor's dinner party for the last 2 years. The mask held. Even now, even in handcuffs, the mask held because the mask was all he had left. His attorney, a man named Garrison Wells who specialized in high-profile defense cases and drove a silver Mercedes, held a press conference that afternoon. He stood on the courthouse steps and called it a reckless investigation, built on unverified claims from a confused elderly man and tainted by the involvement of known criminal elements. Kyle posted on social media that evening a long, carefully written statement, every word chosen for maximum sympathy. He wrote about sacrifice, about giving up his career to care for the only family he had left, about the heartbreak of watching his grandfather decline, about false accusations born from misunderstanding and confusion. He wrote about love. He used the word love 11 times. No mention of the shed, no mention of the padlock, no mention of the money, no mention of the bucket or the cot or the boarded window or the 4 cans of soup. 700 likes in the first hour. Comments poured in. Kyle is the kindest person I know. That old man doesn't know what day it is. Someone told me bikers are involved. That tells you everything you need to know. Praying for you, Kyle. Stay strong. A GoFundMe launched by a friend from Kyle's church raised $14,000 in 3 days. Brody read every comment. He sat in his shop at 2 in the morning, scrolling through his phone, reading every word written by people who had never seen the inside of that shed, who had never read the notebook, who had never seen the bruises or the bucket or the 5 words scratched into a wall. He wanted to post the photos, wanted to upload every page of the notebook, wanted to put Eugene's voice into the ears of every person typing prayers for Kyle Whitfield. But he did not, because Nina had told him the courtroom was where this ended. And Brody, for the first time in his life, trusted the courtroom. Then, 1 week before trial, something happened that nobody expected. Nina called at 8 in the morning. She didn't say hello. Alcott flipped. Brody sat up. What? Dr. Miriam Alcott called the county attorney's office directly this morning. She said 4 words. I want to cooperate. Brody's heart stopped. Why? Because we subpoenaed her records, all of them. Not just Eugene's file, everything. And when her attorney saw what we were pulling, he told her the math wasn't in her favor. She's looking at decades, Brody, decades. What did she give up? Nina took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was the voice of a woman who had spent 14 years in prosecutorial work and thought she had seen the worst of what people do to each other. She was wrong. It's not just Eugene. It was never just Eugene. Alcott has been running this for 4 years. She identifies elderly patients through free health screenings at churches, senior centers, VFW halls. She targets people who live alone or with a single family member. She builds a relationship. Then she connects them with what she calls a caregiver coordinator. Kyle. He moves in, takes over finances, isolates the patient, and Alcott provides the medical cover, the cognitive decline diagnosis, The paperwork that makes everything look legal on the surface. How many? Nina was quiet, too quiet. Nina, how many? 7. 7 confirmed victims. Eugene was number 7. Brody stood up. He walked to the shop door and pressed his forehead against the metal and closed his eyes. Did any of them? Yes. One word. The worst word. Walter Briggs, 83 years old, 11 months ago, found outside his home in January. The temperature that night was 24 degrees. Death certificate said natural causes. His insurance paid out 2 weeks later, $420,000. The beneficiary had been changed 9 months prior. A nephew, connected to Kyle through Alcott's network. Brody's hand was flat against the door. He could feel the metal vibrating under his palm. Or maybe that was him. The door of Walter's house was locked, Nina said, from the outside. The air left the room, every molecule of it. Brody stood with his forehead against the door, and his palm pressed flat, and he felt something shift inside him that would never shift back. A man had died in 24-degree weather behind a locked door. An 83-year-old man had frozen to death on his own property because someone locked him out of his own house in January and let the night do the rest. And it was written off as natural causes, and the insurance paid, and the world moved on. If you hadn't been sitting in that diner, Nina said, her voice barely holding, Eugene Whitfield would have been Walter Briggs. Brody opened his eyes. He looked at the workbench, at the tools, at the brass key that still sat where he'd left it the night Eugene slid it across a diner table with shaking hands. He thought about Walter Briggs dying alone in 24-degree weather. He thought about Eugene sitting on a cot with a butter knife. He thought about 7 tables that said no and 1 chair that said sit. And he picked up the phone. Nina, whatever you need from me, whatever testimony, whatever statement, whatever it costs, I'm in, all the way. I know, she said. You were in the moment you pulled out that chair. The trial started on a Wednesday, and the courtroom was full before the doors officially opened. Local press had taken the first 2 rows behind the prosecution table. 2 Phoenix television stations had sent crews. A reporter from the Arizona Daily Star sat in the 3rd row with a legal pad balanced on her knee and a pen that hadn't stopped moving since she got the tip about Alcott's cooperation deal. The story had grown beyond a single old man in a single shed. 7 victims. A dead man named Walter Briggs. A doctor who had weaponized her medical license. A network that had been operating in plain sight for 4 years while an entire community looked the other way. And in the middle of that 3rd row, sitting where he had sat every Sunday for 20 years, next to a woman named Martha, who used to hold his hand during the sermon, Eugene Whitfield took his seat. He looked different. 6 weeks had passed since the deputies cut the padlock. 6 weeks of 3 meals a day and a bed with clean sheets and a window he could open whenever he wanted. He had gained 14 pounds. The hollows in his cheeks had filled. His hair was trimmed, neat, parted the way Martha had always liked it. He wore a blue button-down shirt, tucked in, buttoned correctly, every button in the right hole. His hands rested in his lap, steady. The arthritis medication was working. His knee still ached, but the grinding had eased. He had walked from the parking lot to the courthouse without gripping a single chair back, without leaning on anything, without asking anyone for help. He did not look at Kyle. Kyle sat at the defense table in a navy suit and a white shirt and a tie that someone had probably picked out for him because Kyle understood that every detail mattered. His hair was combed. His hands were folded on the table. His posture said, I am a good man who has been wrongly accused. His posture had been saying that for 35 years. The suit was new. Garrison Wells had made sure of that. A man on trial needs to look like the man his neighbors believe him to be, not the man the prosecution describes. Wells sat beside him. Silver hair, expensive watch, the kind of attorney who billed $600 an hour and earned every penny, not because he was right, but because he was convincing. Wells had won cases that should have been lost. He had turned juries with tone of voice alone. He had a gift for making reasonable doubt feel like certainty. But Wells had never faced a spiral-bound notebook. The prosecution opened. Assistant County Attorney Diane Reeves stood before the jury and spoke without notes. She was 51 years old, had prosecuted everything from petty theft to homicide, and she had spent the last 3 weeks living inside Eugene Whitfield's file until she could recite the bank statements from memory. She told the jury about a diner, about a man who walked through a glass door with a limp and a shirt buttoned wrong and asked 7 tables if he could sit down. She told them about 7 refusals. She told them about an 8th table. She did not mention Brody by name. She did not mention the club. Nina had advised her carefully. The jury did not need to know who sat at the 8th table. They needed to know that someone did. Then Reeves walked them through the notebook, not page by page, entry by entry. She read the dates, the amounts, the words Eugene had written in handwriting so precise it looked like engineering specs. March 12th. Kyle took the checkbook, grabbed my arm, first time. She let that sit. April 19th. Kyle moved me to the shed. I heard the padlock click. That sound. I will hear that sound for the rest of my life. She let that sit too. June 10th. I started working the latch with a butter knife. She paused, looked at the jury. 12 people, 8 women, 4 men, ages ranging from 28 to 71. The 71-year-old, a retired school teacher named Margaret Inman, had not blinked in 4 minutes. Eugene Whitfield did not escape a shed, Reeves said. He engineered his own rescue, the same way he engineered bridges for 33 years. He identified the weak point, he applied consistent pressure, and he walked 1.5 miles on a knee that needed surgery to find help. Because every system that should have helped him had already failed. She turned to the bank statements, projected them on a screen, yellow highlights, withdrawal after withdrawal, 5,000, 8,000, 10,000, 15,000 in a single transaction. The numbers climbed like a fever chart. Total amount drained from Eugene's accounts, $237,000 over 22 months. Then the insurance policy, $480,000. Beneficiary changed from VFW post 549 to Kyle James Whitfield. Then the medical records. Dr. Miriam Alcott, moderate to severe cognitive decline. And then the neurological evaluation from Tucson Medical Center, the one conducted 6 weeks ago, the one that showed Eugene Whitfield scoring in the 94th percentile for his age group. The defendant didn't just steal from Eugene Whitfield, Reeves said. He stole something no bank statement can measure. He stole Eugene Whitfield's credibility. He made it so that when Eugene tried to tell the truth, nobody believed him. He weaponized an old man's age against him. He turned Eugene's dignity into a punchline, and he did it with a smile. Wells stood for the defense. He was good. He was more than good. He started soft, sympathetic. He painted Kyle as a young man overwhelmed by responsibility, a 35-year-old who had given up everything, his social life, his career trajectory, his freedom to care for the only family he had left. My client isn't a monster, Wells said. He's a young man who stepped in when no one else would. Martha Whitfield passed away, and Kyle was the only one who showed up. Not the neighbors, not the VFW friends, not the church. Kyle. And yes, mistakes were made. Caregiver burnout is real. Stress is real. The pressure of watching someone you love decline is real. He leaned on the word decline. Let it breathe. Let the jury sit with it. The prosecution wants you to believe that Eugene Whitfield was perfectly fine. But the reality is more complicated. Memory is unreliable. Self-assessment is unreliable. A man can score well on a cognitive test and still have episodes, still have moments. The defense does not dispute that Eugene Whitfield is intelligent. We dispute the narrative that my client is a predator. It was a good opening, smooth, polished. The words hung in the air the way expensive cologne hangs in an elevator. Present, noticeable, but underneath it, nothing. The witnesses began. Rosa Gutierrez took the stand first, the bank teller. She wore a blouse she had ironed twice that morning, and she held her hands together in her lap to keep them from shaking. She told the jury about the day Eugene leaned across the counter, about his eyes, about the way they kept flicking toward the door, about the 6 words he whispered. "This isn't right. He's taking it all." The prosecutor asked what she did. Rosa said she called Adult Protective Services that afternoon. A caseworker visited 3 days later. And what happened? The case was closed. The caseworker said Mr. Whitfield reported he was fine. Was Kyle Whitfield present during that visit? Yes, he was in the room the entire time. In your professional observation, Ms. Gutierrez, did Eugene Whitfield appear to be speaking freely? Wells objected. Speculation. Sustained. But the jury had already seen Rosa's face. They had already heard the tremor in her voice when she said the case was closed. Some things don't need to be said out loud. Hank Reeves took the stand next, the retired mail carrier. He told the jury about 17 years of walking past Eugene's house, about the morning wave, about the coffee in hand, about the day the waving stopped. "I knocked twice," Hank said. Both times Kyle answered, said Eugene was resting. But Eugene never rested. That man was up at 5:30 every day for as long as I knew him. 5:30, coffee, front porch, wave. What did you think when the routine changed? I thought something was wrong, but I told myself it wasn't my business. Hank's voice broke. I told myself that for 18 months. Donna Britton, the VFW bartender. She told the jury about Thursday trivia nights, about the bridge builders, about Eugene's laugh, full, rough, the kind that made other people laugh just hearing it, about the Thursday he didn't show up, and the phone call from Kyle the next week. He said Eugene wasn't up to coming anymore. I tried calling Eugene's number. Disconnected. Did you follow up? I drove to the house once. Kyle met me at the door. He was very polite, very kind. He said Eugene was having a difficult day and couldn't see visitors. I left a card. Eugene never called. Why didn't you push further? Donna looked at her hands. Because Kyle was so convincing. He was the kind of person you trust immediately. Clean-cut, polite, concerned. He made you feel like questioning him was insulting, like you were the one being unreasonable. She looked at the jury. I'll never forgive myself for that. Witness after witness, each one a thread in the net that Kyle had woven around Eugene's life. The pastor who had stopped visiting because Kyle said Eugene didn't want to see anyone. The neighbor who had brought a casserole and been turned away at the door. The pharmacist who had filled Eugene's prescriptions for years until Kyle transferred them to a mail-order pharmacy that delivered only to the house. Each witness told the same story from a different angle. A community that had watched an old man disappear and convinced themselves it was natural. Because Kyle was there. Because Kyle was polite. Because Kyle made it easy to look away. Then the neurologist took the stand. Dr. Patricia Velasco, board certified, 22 years of practice. She had administered Eugene's cognitive evaluation at Tucson Medical Center. Dr. Velasco, what were the results of Mr. Whitfield's evaluation? Mr. Whitfield scored in the 94th percentile for his age group across all cognitive domains: memory, executive function, language, visuospatial processing, attention. His scores were not borderline, they were exceptional. Is there any indication of cognitive decline? None. Mr. Whitfield's cognitive function is not only intact, it is remarkably strong. I have tested thousands of patients. Eugene Whitfield has one of the sharpest minds I've encountered in a man his age. Could a man with Mr. Whitfield's cognitive profile have episodes of confusion that would justify a diagnosis of moderate to severe decline? No. The diagnosis in Dr. Alcott's records is incompatible with every metric we measured. It is not a difference of opinion, it is a fabrication. Wells cross-examined. He pushed on the timeline, suggested cognitive function could fluctuate, suggested the evaluation at TMC was conducted under favorable conditions, suggested Eugene might have performed better because he was no longer under the stress of caregiving dynamics. Velasco listened to each question. Then she answered with the precision of a woman who had spent 22 years in a field where precision was the difference between a correct diagnosis and a destroyed life. Cognitive decline of the severity Dr. Alcott documented does not fluctuate into the 94th percentile, Mr. Wells. That is not how neurology works. A patient with moderate to severe decline does not complete a crossword puzzle in 9 minutes, does not recall dates and amounts from 2 years of documentation with perfect accuracy, does not maintain a contemporaneous written record that demonstrates sustained executive function over a 22-month period. The diagnosis was false. There is no clinical ambiguity. Wells sat down. He did not recross. Then Dr. Miriam Alcott was called to the stand. The courtroom shifted. Every body leaned forward. Every pen stopped moving. The Phoenix crews adjusted their cameras. The reporter from the Star turned to a fresh page. Alcott walked to the witness box the way a woman walks when she has already decided that the weight of what she is about to say is less than the weight of what she has been carrying. She was 56 years old. Gray streaks in dark hair pulled back. No jewelry, no makeup. She wore a plain black dress and she sat down and she folded her hands and she did not look at Kyle. Reeves approached. Dr. Alcott, you entered into a cooperation agreement with the county attorney's office. Is that correct? Yes. And as part of that agreement, you have agreed to testify truthfully about your involvement in the financial exploitation of elderly patients. Is that correct? Yes. How long have you been doing this? Alcott took a breath. 4 years. Describe how it worked. And Alcott talked. 3 hours. She described the screenings at churches, in senior centers, and VFW halls. She described how she identified patients, the ones who lived alone, the ones with limited family, the ones whose isolation made them invisible. She described the relationship building, the trust, the slow, careful process of becoming the doctor they relied on. She described Kyle, how she had connected him with patient after patient, how he moved in, how he took over, how she provided the paperwork, the diagnosis, the medical justification that made everything look legal on paper. She described the system the way an engineer describes a bridge, load-bearing structures, points of failure, tolerances, 7 victims, 7 elderly men and women who had been targeted, diagnosed, isolated, and drained. Some of them were still alive. Some of them were in facilities where they had been placed by the very people who were robbing them. And one of them was dead. Tell the jury about Walter Briggs, Reeves said. Alcott closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. Walter was 83. He lived alone in a house off Tank Verde. His wife died in 2019. He had one nephew. The nephew was connected to Kyle through me. I diagnosed Walter with cognitive decline in March of the previous year. The nephew moved in. The same pattern, finances, isolation, insurance change. How did Walter Briggs die? He was found outside his home in January. The temperature was 24 degrees. He had been locked out. The door was locked from the inside. He couldn't get back in. Who locked the door? The nephew. Was this an accident? Alcott looked at her hands. No. The courtroom was so quiet that when the reporter from the Star dropped her pen, the sound carried to every corner of the room. Dr. Alcott, Reeves said, in your professional and personal assessment, was Eugene Whitfield ever cognitively impaired? Alcott turned her head. For the first time since she had taken the stand, she looked at Eugene, directly at him, across the courtroom, past the attorneys and the jury, and the cameras and the gallery full of people who had come to watch the truth fill a room that had been empty of it for years. Eugene looked back. His hands were in his lap, his thumbs pressed together, steady. "No," Alcott said. Eugene Whitfield was one of the sharpest patients I ever examined. I knew he was competent. I knew he understood exactly what was happening to him. I falsified the records anyway. Why? Because Kyle paid me, and because I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself they were old, that they wouldn't notice, that the money was going to be inherited anyway. I told myself every lie a person tells when they know what they're doing is wrong, and they do it anyway. She was crying now, not the performative kind, not the kind designed for a jury, the deep kind, the kind that comes from the place where you store the things you did that you can never undo. "I was wrong," she said, "and Walter Briggs is dead because I was wrong." The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 47 minutes. When they filed back in, the foreman, a 46-year-old electrician named David Ruiz, who had sat in the front row of the jury box for the entire trial with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, stood and unfolded the verdict form. Guilty, count 1, elder abuse. Guilty, count 2, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Guilty, count 3, unlawful confinement. Guilty, count 4, fraud. Guilty on all counts. Kyle stood when the verdict was read. His hands went behind his back without being asked. Still calm, still polite, still performing. Because the performance was all he had left. The mask held, even now, even with the word guilty echoing 4 times off the courtroom walls. The deputies moved toward him. As they led him past the gallery, past the rows of press and witnesses and community members who had finally seen what they should have seen 2 years ago, Kyle looked at Eugene. His mouth opened. A word formed. Maybe an apology. Maybe an excuse. Maybe one last performance. Eugene looked back. His eyes held no hatred, no rage, no satisfaction, not even relief. Just clarity. The clearest, steadiest thing in the room. The eyes of a man who had carved "I am still here" into a wall and meant every letter. Kyle closed his mouth. The word died. The deputies walked him through the side door. It shut behind him with a sound that had more finality than any verdict. Not a slam, not a bang, just a click. Metal finding metal. A lock closing. The same sound Eugene had heard every night for 2 years. The same sound. But now it was Kyle on the other side. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge Roberta Chavez, 17 years on the bench, read the pre-sentencing report in her chambers and sat alone for 20 minutes before taking the bench. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, looking at Kyle, "in 17 years I have presided over hundreds of cases. Cases involving violence, cases involving deception, cases involving betrayal. But I have never seen a case as calculated, as methodical, or as cruel as this one. You did not act in a moment of rage. You did not act under duress. You constructed a system designed to erase your grandfather as a person. You stole his money. You stole his freedom. You stole his credibility. And you did it while smiling, while attending church, while coaching children, while accepting praise from a community that believed every word you said." She paused. 24 years, maximum on every count, consecutive. Kyle did not flinch. The mask held one final time. Then the deputies led him away, and the mask walked through the side door, and the door closed, and it was gone. Alcott received 7 years, reduced for cooperation. She would testify against 2 others in the network. The state attorney general's office opened 5 additional cases. Walter Briggs's death was officially reclassified as a homicide investigation. The nephew was arrested 11 days later at a motel in Flagstaff. The courtroom emptied. Press first, then witnesses, Then the gallery, row by row, the way a theater empties after a show, except this was not a show and nobody was applauding. Eugene stayed in his seat, the third row, Martha's row. He sat with his hands in his lap, his thumbs pressed together. Not from fear this time, not from cold, not from the habit of bracing himself against whatever came next. From relief. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that starts in the center of the chest and moves outward like warmth, loosening muscles you didn't know were clenched, releasing tension you didn't know you were holding, filling spaces that had been hollow for so long you had forgotten they were supposed to be full. He sat there until the courtroom was empty, until the lights were dimmed, until the bailiff came and asked if he was all right. Eugene looked up at him. "I'm fine, I just need another minute." The bailiff nodded and stepped back. Eugene closed his eyes. He thought about Martha, about the way she used to squeeze his hand during the sermon, about the pot roast on Sundays, about the way she said his name, Gene, like it was something worth keeping. He thought about a notebook with a blue cover, about a butter knife, about the words on a wall. He thought about a diner, a glass door, a bell that jingled, 7 tables that said no, and one man in a dark corner who stood up and pulled out a chair. Eugene opened his eyes. He stood. His knee ached, but it held. He walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway and through the courthouse doors and into the Tucson sun. And for the first time in 2 years, the warmth on his face felt like something he was allowed to have. 3 days after the verdict, Eugene Whitfield did something he had not done in over 2 years. He drove. He sat behind the wheel of his own car, a 2014 Ford Taurus that had been parked in the garage since Kyle took the keys. The battery had been replaced, the tires inflated, the registration renewed, his license reinstated after the cognitive evaluation proved what he had never stopped knowing, that his mind was his, had always been his, and no forged diagnosis could take it from him. He turned the key. The engine caught. His hands were on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the way Martha had always teased him about. "You drive like you're taking a test, Gene." He could hear her voice, clear as the day she said it, 20 years ago, 30, yesterday. He pulled out of the driveway, his house, his mailbox with the name Whitfield on the side that Hank the mail carrier had polished without being asked, the day Eugene came home from the hospital. His front porch where he had stood every morning with coffee for 17 years, waving at a man who walked the same route every day. He had waved at Hank this morning. First time in 2 years. Hank had waved back and then turned away fast, but not fast enough. Eugene saw him press his sleeve against his eyes. The drive to Rosie's Grill took 18 minutes. He knew the route, had driven it 100 times before Kyle, before the shed, before the padlock and the bucket, and the 4 cans of soup that became the borders of his world. His knee ached when he pressed the brake pedal. The arthritis would never fully heal. The surgeon had said as much, but the medication had taken the grinding down to a dull throb, and a dull throb was something Eugene could work with. He had worked with worse. He had calculated load-bearing tolerances for bridges that spanned rivers and canyons and highways. A knee was nothing compared to a cantilever. He parked in the same lot, stepped out, stood for a moment, let the sun hit his face, let the heat wrap around him the way Arizona heat does, total, unforgiving, and strangely honest. The desert doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Eugene walked to the door, pushed it open with one hand, because one hand was enough now. The bell jingled. The waitress looked up. Same girl, blonde ponytail. She had been there the day Eugene walked in with a limp and a shirt buttoned wrong and asked 7 tables for a place to sit. She had watched every refusal. She had held the door for him when he left. She recognized him. Her face changed. Not pity. She had looked at him with pity the first time. This was different. This was something closer to respect, something closer to awe. Because the man standing in the doorway was not the man who had limped through it 2 months ago. This man stood straight. His shirt was tucked in. His hair was trimmed. His eyes were calm. "Welcome back," she said. Eugene nodded. "Thank you." He looked toward the back corner. The table against the wall where the overhead lights still had not been replaced. 2 months and nobody had changed that bulb. Maybe nobody ever would. Maybe that table was meant to sit in shadow. Maybe some things happen in the dark because that's the only place they can. Brody was already there. Same chair. Same worn leather vest with the patch that made people cross the street and lock their doors and look the other way. Same dark blonde hair pulled back and tied off. Same jaw that had been set wrong and never corrected. Same arms that stretched the sleeves of a black t-shirt. Same coffee, black, no sugar. And across from him, the second chair was already pulled out. Eugene felt something hit him in the chest. Not pain, not grief, something bigger than both. The chair was out. Brody had pulled it out before Eugene arrived, had angled it the same way, slightly turned so Eugene's bad knee wouldn't have to twist. The same gesture, the same quiet act that had changed everything. Eugene crossed the diner floor. His steps were steady. The limp was there. It would always be there, but it no longer owned him. He walked past the other tables, past the people eating their lunches and drinking their coffees and living their ordinary lives. None of them looked at him the way they had looked at him the first time. None of them turned away. He reached the table. He stood there for a moment, looking at the chair, looking at Brody. Neither spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, because the things that needed saying lived in a space that words couldn't quite reach. They lived in the space between two men sitting across from each other in a roadside diner. One who had asked a question nobody wanted to hear, and one who had answered it with a single word in a chair. Eugene sat down. His knee cracked. An old sound, a familiar sound, but not a frightening one, not anymore. Brody looked at him for a long time, studying him the way he had studied him the first day. Not through him, not past him, at him. "You look better," Brody said. "I eat 3 meals a day now." "Good. And I sleep in a bed." "Good. A real bed, with a pillow, and a blanket that actually covers my feet." Brody almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved a fraction of an inch. "That'll do it." Eugene flagged the waitress. She came over fast, the same way she had come the first time, when Brody raised one finger and ordered without asking. "Eggs," Eugene said, "scrambled, bacon, pancakes, toast, coffee, orange juice." The waitress wrote it down. Then she looked at Brody. "Same for you?" "Just coffee." She left. Eugene settled into his chair. He pressed his palms flat on the table. A habit, a reflex from 2 years of pressing his hands against surfaces to stop them from shaking. But they were not shaking now. 24 years, Eugene said. "I heard. Maximum on every count. Consecutive." The judge called it the most calculated case of elder abuse she'd seen in 17 years on the bench. Brody nodded. He turned his coffee mug between his hands, slowly, the way he always did. Alcott got 7, reduced for cooperation. She's testifying against 2 others in the network. Nina told me. And Walter Briggs. Eugene's voice changed, dropped lower, rougher, the way a voice drops when it's carrying something too heavy for the throat. They reclassified it, homicide. The nephew was arrested in Flagstaff. I heard that too. Eugene looked at his hands. Walter was 83 years old. He survived Korea. He survived 40 years of marriage and the loss of his wife and the loneliness that came after. He survived everything a life can throw at a man. And he died in 24-degree weather because someone locked his door from the inside and walked away. Brody set his mug down. "If I hadn't gotten that latch open," Eugene said, "if I hadn't walked that 1.5 miles, if you hadn't been sitting at this table." But you did, and I was. I'd be Walter. You're not Walter. No, I'm not. Because of you. Brody shook his head. The motion was slow, deliberate, the way he did everything. No, because of you. You kept that notebook, Eugene. Every date, every amount, every word he said. You rented that storage unit, paid cash, hid money in a boot. You carved your name into a wall. You worked a latch with a butter knife for weeks. You walked a mile and a half on a knee that should have put you on the ground. You did all of that before I did anything. You pulled out a chair. You walked to the chair. 7 people said no. And you kept walking. That's not me, Eugene. That's you. I just happened to be sitting here. You didn't just happen to be sitting here. Eugene leaned forward. His voice was steady now, firm. The voice of a man who had spent 33 years giving specifications that held up bridges. 7 people in this room looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the trouble. You looked at me and pulled out a chair. That's not happenstance. That's a choice. And that choice is the reason I'm alive. The food arrived. The waitress set the plate down in front of Eugene. Eggs piled high, bacon crisp, pancakes stacked 3 deep, toast on the side, coffee steaming, orange juice in a tall glass. Eugene looked at the plate. He did not check the door. He did not check the window. He did not scan the room for threats. He did not brace for the plate to be taken away. He picked up his fork and he ate. Real bites, full bites. He buttered the pancakes and poured too much syrup on them and ate them in big, unashamed mouthfuls. He ate the bacon with his fingers. He drank the orange juice in 3 long pulls. He spread jam on the toast, strawberry, and bit into it and chewed with his eyes closed because it tasted like something he had forgotten he was allowed to enjoy. Brody watched him eat, and this time, unlike the first time, there was no tightness in his chest, no anger, no urgency. Just a man watching another man eat breakfast in a diner, the most ordinary thing in the world, and somehow the most extraordinary. They talked about the sentencing, about Nina's work on the wider investigation, about the 5 additional cases the Attorney General's office had opened, about the families who were being contacted, about the people who might still be saved because Eugene had kept a notebook and Brody had pulled out a chair. They talked about Martha. Eugene told Brody about the pot roast on Sundays, about the way she hummed in the kitchen, about the last thing she ever said to him. "Don't forget to eat, Gene," said on a Tuesday night, casual, offhand, the kind of thing a wife says without thinking because she said it 1,000 times before. She died in her sleep that night, and Eugene never forgot those words. "She'd have liked you," Eugene said. "I doubt that. She would have. Martha didn't care about patches or vests or what people looked like. She cared about what people did. And what you did, she would have looked at you and said, 'That's a good man, Gene. Make sure he comes for pot roast.'" Brody turned his mug, didn't say anything, but something shifted in his face. Something softened, just barely, just enough. They talked about the Diamondbacks, about whether the season was salvageable, about the coffee at Rosie's, which they both agreed had always been burnt, but neither of them cared enough to go somewhere else. They talked about the weather, which was 107 degrees and would stay that way until October. They talked the way 2 men talk when the hard things have already been said, and what remains is just the living. Eugene finished every bite on his plate. He set the fork down, pressed his napkin against his mouth, sat back. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "Why? I've asked you before and you gave me an answer, but I want the real one. Not the short version, the one you think about when you're sitting in your shop at night." Brody stopped turning the mug. He looked at Eugene, held his gaze. "You really want to know?" "I really want to know." Brody was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was lower than Eugene had ever heard it. Not a whisper, just close. "My old man was 68 when he got sick. Lungs. 40 years of Marlboros. He moved in with my sister because he couldn't live alone anymore. Her husband didn't want him there. Didn't say it to his face, said it in other ways. Moved him to the back bedroom. Stopped cooking for him. Stopped talking to him. My old man called me twice. First time, he said he was fine. Second time, he didn't say anything, just breathed. I could hear him breathing, and I knew he was trying to tell me something, but the words wouldn't come because he'd been alone so long, he'd forgotten how to ask for help. Brody stopped, picked up the mug, set it down without drinking. I drove 6 hours, got there at midnight, found him in the back bedroom, thin, hadn't eaten in days. His clothes were dirty. He looked at me and the first thing he said was, "I didn't want to bother anyone." Eugene's eyes were wet. He died 4 months later, in a VA hospital. I was holding his hand, and the last thing he said to me was, "I wish I'd asked sooner." Brody looked at the table, at his hands, at the mug. When you walked across this diner, Eugene, I saw my old man. I saw a man who needed somewhere to sit and was running out of people to ask. And I thought about what would have happened if someone had pulled out a chair for my father. If someone had looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "You can sit here. You are welcome here. You are not a burden." He looked up. "That's why. Because you asked. Because you needed a chair. Because I had one. And because my old man taught me that the worst thing in this world isn't cruelty, it's indifference. It's a room full of people who see a man struggling and decide it's not their problem." Eugene reached across the table. He put his hand on Brody's forearm. Not a handshake, not a pat, a grip, firm, steady. The grip of a man who had spent 33 years building things that held. "Your father raised a good man," Eugene said. Brody didn't respond, but he didn't pull his arm away. They sat like that for a moment. Two men in a roadside diner, 174, 145. One who had survived a locked shed and a stolen life and walked a mile and a half on a broken knee to ask a question nobody wanted to hear. One who had answered it because his father died wishing he'd asked sooner. Eugene stood. He reached for his wallet. "Don't," Brody said. "You bought me breakfast." "No," Eugene shook his head. "You bought me breakfast the first time, and that breakfast saved my life. This one's mine." Brody looked at him, then nodded. Eugene paid at the counter, left a 30% tip. The waitress thanked him by name. He smiled at her. A real smile, the kind that comes from a place that has been replenished. He walked back to Brody's table, stood there. "Same time next week?" Brody leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and for the first time since Eugene Whitfield had known him, Brody Hale smiled. Not a half smile, not a twitch, a real one, full, unhurried, the kind of smile that changes a face completely. "Chair will be out." Eugene nodded. He turned, walked across the diner floor, past the tables, past the counter, past the waitress. His limp was there, would always be there, but his hands were at his sides, steady. His back was straight, his head was up. He pushed through the glass door, the bell jingled. The Arizona sun hit his face, and for the first time, Eugene Whitfield did not look behind him. He drove home, his home. He parked in his driveway. He walked to his front door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key. His key, not borrowed, not stolen back, not hidden inside a boot. And he unlocked his own door and walked into his own kitchen and sat down at his own table. No padlock, no bucket, no 4 cans of soup, no plywood on the windows, no butter knife hidden under a mattress. He sat at the table where Martha used to set the pot roast on Sundays, where they had paid bills together since 1971, where he had drunk coffee every morning for decades before a grandson with a smile and a lie and a padlock had tried to erase him from his own life. Eugene folded his hands on the table, pressed his thumbs together, closed his eyes. He thought about Walter Briggs, 83 years old, dying in 24-degree weather behind a locked door because nobody pulled out a chair. He thought about the 6 other victims, the ones who were still being found, the ones whose stories were just now being heard because Eugene's story had cracked the silence wide open. He thought about Rosa at the bank who had tried, about Hank who had noticed, about Donna who had remembered, about the people who had seen something wrong and tried to act and been defeated by a system that believed the younger voice. He thought about a notebook with a blue cover, about the words on the first page. If anything happens to me, this is why. He had written those words expecting to die. He had written them as evidence for an investigation into his own death. And instead, they had become the evidence that saved his life. He thought about a diner, a glass door, a bell, 7 tables, 7 refusals, and 1 man in a dark corner who had stood up and pulled out a chair because his own father had died wishing someone had done the same. Eugene opened his eyes. He looked at the kitchen around him, at the window where the light came through, at the door that had no lock on the outside, at the life that had been given back to him by a brass key and a spiral notebook and a stranger who said one word: sit. Because the difference between a man disappearing and a man surviving was never about strength. It was never about power. It was never about the system or the law or the people who were supposed to protect you and didn't. It was about one moment, one question, one ordinary act of decency in an ordinary diner on an ordinary afternoon. Mind if I join you? And someone choosing to say yes.